welcome to EnergyTech Essentials from the Net Zero Technology Centre. Thank you for joining today's session, where we're focusing all about how do you look at engineering your energy tech startup and go from a demonstrator all the way through to trials, testing, real development of your technology. It's a key part of building an energy tech venture, and we're delighted to be joined today by Blackfish Engineering, who've been a partner of the TechX program over the last few years, to tell us a little bit more about their experience. And this series is all about how we help founders and early stage energy tech ventures take those steps to try and get technology out there into the real world. So hopefully a really good session around those trials, those demonstrators. And if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A function as well. So hi, James and Tim, how are you both doing today?
Hi, Ed. Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, very good, thank you.
Yes, it's good, thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, I think to start us off, if people don't know what Blackfish Engineering is all about, then feel free to tell us a little bit about that. And then also, I think I've given you this prompt of if startups are looking at the early stage prototype and technology development, what are some of the top tips that maybe come to mind from yourselves to kick us off?
Cool. Well, maybe just very briefly, we'll introduce ourselves and our roles. So I'm Tim Warren. I'm one of the co-founders and operations director of Blackfish. And my background, I started off in Rolls-Royce and then joined a company called Tidal Generation. So very much in the offshore renewables sector for the last 20 years or so. And my core experience is mechanical engineering design and sort of the project management associated with that.
Excellent. Cheers, Tim. So my name is James Hastie. My background is mechanical engineering. Being an Aberdeen boy, I started in the oil and gas industry, offshore drilling, before moving into university research, mainly in structures and materials. Before moving into renewables and now at Blackfish as a mechanical engineer. So my remit is mainly sort of the geeky kind of structural analysis type stuff, as well as overseeing a lot of our operations in around Aberdeen, where I'm based, which includes a lot of interaction with the likes of TechX Accelerator and supporting early stage startups with really understanding their techno-economic requirements and then developing their designs and their business models to actually meet those requirements. So I guess I'll pass it back to you, Tim, if you had some slides to go through.
So I've got 2 or 3 slides for really just to get this session going and just to try and provide a bit of context to what we do and some hints and tips about creating trials and demonstrators and prototypes at different stages in the design. So if I just share my screen, if I share that and make it large. Cool, has that come through?
It has, yep. Yes.
Excellent. Right. So I guess very briefly, Blackfish Engineering. So we are the innovators engineer. So all of our work really is involved in early stage technology development, and that's what we specialize in those sort of TRL levels. Naught really, as we get involved in concept design, through to 7 or 8, where people are demonstrating full scale devices in appropriate environments. So what we always get involved with, what we really get involved with, is engineering design, some in-depth structural analysis, and systems integration, and that's what we've done in a huge variety of projects over the years. Blackfish has been going for 10 years, nearly 10 years now. Most of our work is clean tech, offshore renewables, wind, wave, tidal, hydrogen, floating solar, that kind of thing. But I think today, sort of in this discussion, or I hope so, I think an awful lot of what we're going to be talking about is valid for a huge number of sectors. It doesn't really matter what sector you're in, the process through which you develop and prove and demonstrate your technology is fundamentally fairly similar. So I guess when Ed gave us a sort of a little guidance as to what we want to talk about today, how do you get a demonstrator out there? What do you have to think about? What are the problems you're going to come across? Actually, it can be split, I think, into 2 sort of main areas. And one is the early stage TRLs, technology readiness level, 0 to 4, where it's still pretty small. The ideas are quite early, and to change a phrase that's quite famous, learn stuff and break stuff rather than move fast. These early stage technology phases, if you like. It's all about learning as much as you can. You've got an idea, you've got a principle, you need to prove whether that principle is going to be right or not. So absolutely test stuff, but think about what you're going to test, but do it in a quick way. You need to learn if your solution is going to work or not, and how you're going to improve it, and do it quickly. So plywood, 3D printing, concrete blocks, scaffolding, cable ties, that's all the kind of the mentality you want in these early stages. Get a test rig built in a week, in a day, test something and get those results as quick as you can. And that's sort of the essence of those early stage technologies. But then when you get through into the later TRLs, 5 through certainly if you're talking about 7 or 8, where you're talking about full scale technology development or technology demonstration in a representative environment, and for us very often that means out at sea, but there's plenty of other environments obviously. Learn fast, but at this stage don't break stuff. Basically, the message that we've got for you is you need to do it properly. You need that kind of dependability, credibility, that investability. Fundamentally, you're looking to prove your technology so that you are investable, and that means going through the engineering rigor properly, documenting properly, and testing safely and thoroughly. So yeah, keep learning. Absolutely, you've got to learn, you've got to prove, you've got to develop, you've got to evolve your design, but you have to do it in a professional and structured and organized way. So I guess that these are just some photos of projects that we've done, where hopefully the difference between those two photos becomes relatively clear as to the difference between the stages of early stage TRL and late stage TRL. So that was really what I was going to say in the intro. I think it's quite interesting to split demonstration into those two different phases, if you like, and think about them in different ways.
Perfect. Really interesting. I'm sure we'll pick up some of those examples as you go through it, because it's impressive to see. I always think I came to the energy tech sector later on, and to see startups with the sketches and the drawings and the little 3D printed things to then seeing the big mega structures in the water must be so satisfying. So I'm sure we'll get to that in the discussion. But let's imagine probably looking at that earlier stage first then. If we think of some of these energy technologies that we've got, whether that's in renewables, whether that's in structures, subsea, various other settings, let's think about how they then plan maybe those early, learn fast, break things kind of type of experiments. They have lots of hypotheses, lots of engineering things they need to figure out, from the core technology itself to the casing to the cabling, all sorts of elements. So how do you start planning? Where would you begin? You've kind of got an idea of what you want it to work. How do you then start figuring out, what do we test first? How do we test it? It's probably a big question, but if you're speaking to an TRL 2-3 startup, they're really getting started, where do they kick things off?
Do you want to give that, James?
Well, something I was just going to add initially, Ed, is that what we see a lot with early stage startups is people want to dive in, as you say, they want to get their hands dirty, and that's ultimately what you need to do at early TRL stage. But it's important to remember that your design, your system, is ultimately going to be a sort of collection of a number of subsystems, not necessarily all of which will require some level of testing by you, or some level of development by you. So what I think it's important to really understand straight off the bat is what do we actually need to prove, and what can we take to be off shelf, or what can we take to be already proven from previous from previous work, or from off shelf components, things that are widely available already. So I think that's the first point I would like to stress, is that when getting your hands dirty and testing, it's not necessarily about testing a full your full system at small scale, or at simple simplified form. It's about really understanding, well, what are the unknowns, and what are we looking to verify and understand at this stage, and what aspects can we, like I say, can we take from off-shelf components, and really expedite the process, and ultimately not waste time and resources trying to prove everything, or trying to develop things that are maybe already developed. I think Tim, we've maybe seen that with a number of startups trying to almost
run before you can walk.
Yeah, absolutely, and almost co-develop multiple aspects of their design, which maybe just isn't realistic in terms of resources and budget. Ultimately, it all comes down to how much money you've got, really. And so I would like to stress that first off is by all means get your hands dirty, and as Tim said, plywood, 3D printing now is there to be
really
utilized, and it's something we use a lot of, and we have our 3D printer, and it's by definition it's rapidly improved our prototyping process. So make use of these things, but really identify what it is you're looking to test and understand, and don't necessarily feel that you have to do everything at the early stage.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really useful tool actually that we use called a technology assessment, and it's actually, the details of it are actually described quite well. So we use DNV as a sort of certification body quite often. They're in the offshore world, but a lot of the other bodies use the same tools, which is fundamentally a sort of a risk-based approach. But you break down your technology into different subsystems, and then you assess whether the application of your technology is already demonstrated and proven, whether it's sort of limited experience, or whether it's a sort of brand new thing that doesn't have any other cross-sector experience, and then you look at like your technology, the specific aspect of your technology, and whether that's new or limited or unproven. And so that really, really quickly flushes out the key things of your design as to where's your high risk, what hasn't been proven in the sector before, and what is a brand new thing you're trying to prove. And once you've zoomed in on that, and it allows you to zoom in on it really quickly, you can go through this in an hour and do it. Yeah, get your first draft in an hour. You suddenly, when you've got scores of 9 compared to scores of 1, you're like, right, those are the areas I need to prove and demonstrate and know they're going to work. If you get a score of 1, you're basically, as James said, you're taking an off-the-shelf component and putting it somewhere. You don't need the extra complexity and cost and integration hassle of trying to test everything. So
I think there. Really, I mean, I've seen a number of different frameworks with similar sort of philosophy, Tim, as the technology assessment. I think maybe something that you preach, Edward, as part of the TechX program, the sort of modified TRLs, and sort of breaking down subsystems and looking at the TRL level of individual components at component level, and as Tim said, they're just identifying what are your real unknowns and your real uncertainties at this stage, because ultimately, as I've alluded to already, it sort of always comes down to money and how much budget you've got, particularly for startups, and it can be a real sticking point. It can be something that is the difference between being able to really develop your technology and take it to where you want, and not, basically. And so really understanding what you need to test at the early stage, I think, is a key thing.
That's very helpful. Yeah, I think we see that quite a lot with the startups, because these projects are so gigantic. Actually, there is a bit of advice we've seen that tends to work, which is exactly as you said, is if there are well tested and tried commercial components, let's start with them in your development, because if that's not the thing you're the expert at, and that's not the thing you need to radically innovate in, if it's the power, or if it's cabling, or if it's screws, let's just use everything that is as well certified as you can get, and then let's just focus on the bit that is really unique and novel. And then later on, if you want to make an efficiency or an improvement to another component substructure system, then fine. but it can probably help with that. You often hear the example of Dyson and their 8,000 prototypes of various technologies and vacuum cleaners. What is it like in this energy sector? Because these are big, expensive projects. So how far should startups be going? Should they be expecting to have, loads of, how many plywood bits of things, how many 3D printed models? I'm assuming it's less than the 8,000, but kind of what should
8,000, yeah. I think it's impossible to put a number on it. Every product is its own. It should be treated as on a case by case basis. Every company is different, and the culture of innovation can change from person to person and company to company. Some people are really tactile. They need to see something to believe it, if you like. They want to feel that 3D printed thing in their hand, and they want to shove two bits together and know that it fits. Other people are quite happy to do that on CAD and go, yeah, well, I know it's going to fit because I've just simulated it. I don't need a model. I don't need to apply with something or other to show me how it works. Or they're happy to use naval architecture software and say, well, I know it's going to. I've got a floating object. My software tells me it's going to float like this and it's going to respond. I don't need to do a test. Yet other people feel kind of in their gut that they need to go and test it. So I think you've got to listen to yourself and know what you want to do to make yourself happy that you're doing it in the way that you have confidence in.
Yeah, I mean, a motivation for physical testing over any sort of analysis, aside from the technical, the motivation is always going to be the believability of it. It's when you have props and when you have toys that you can rock up to a conference or an exhibition and have on your stand, it just attract people, attract potential stakeholders. People want to play with it. People can start to believe when they see something, even if it's like Tim says, something that you just put together, just a toy or gadget, almost something 3D printed that shows the mechanism that you're developing or the process. I think enough can't be said about the power of that versus doing something on a computer screen, which it is an important aspect of it as well. And maybe that's something we can touch on during the course of this session, the verification and validation process, and really identifying what is the minimum or let's say the cheapest, the simplest sort of task that we need to do to prove and to verify a certain aspect of testing before we then unlock the next scale or the next stage of the development. So yeah, enough can't be said for physical things that you can see, and more importantly, perhaps your stakeholders can see.
That's helpful, and I'm picturing so. Yeah, we often see the startups come in and they maybe do have their first development or they're in lab stage. So that technology assessment is quite a useful way. So I can almost imagine we almost picture the big final product and then we break it down into those substructures, and then we can start to look at, well, this is actually, relatively well developed. Don't need to go into too much detail. This one's high risk, or maybe bring in that physical testing, which is the shiny bit that an investor or a grant funder or a client is going to go, we're going to want to see that floating, or we want to know what the power output's going to be, and not just simulated, but I want to see, the actual power coming out of it. So
sorry to interrupt, Ed. As you said in your slide, Tim, when you get to that later stage TRL, you don't want to break stuff. And even just looking at some of the pictures we had there, some of the projects we've been involved in, this is some big scale stuff, and there's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot of physical risk to personnel and to people involved. There's also huge cost risks with things going wrong. So even though by definition, trials and demonstrations are de-riskers of your minimum viable product, ultimately the whole point in having a demonstration is to form part of that process. There is a lot that can go wrong with these tests themselves, and so it's almost a case of we de-risk the de-riskers, which are the demonstrations, as far as possible by taking these steps, doing the analysis, doing the smaller scale stuff with 3D printed components, and really understanding that or really having the confidence that when we go to scale and when we go to a sort of a more meaningful demonstration, let's say, then we're confident that things aren't going to break and things aren't going to go wrong.
Excellent. So this maybe touches on a couple of the points that we've raised. So we've kind of got our prototype. We've done some of that early stage component testing. We maybe got a version of the product that is smaller scale. Maybe it's a small scale model. One of the challenges we see in energy that I know you have particular expertise on is the environment. So it's going to go in the water. It's going to go in waves. It's going to be under high pressure. This isn't something that's maybe a household object that's under relatively stable conditions all the time. Some of these technologies will be under huge pressure, So what are the layers that come into that? So when you're then looking at planning out trials or demos or prototype testing, when you've got those real world conditions, what should startups be thinking when they're then thinking, right, well, it works. I plugged it in the lab and we've got it, it's functionally doing its thing. And I want to take it into the real world. What do we need to factor in? I'm just picturing these startups building these lovely toys, and then you take it outside. It's like kids with Lego, and then all of a sudden, the wind blows and it breaks instantly, and you've learned nothing. So, how does that affect the trial design process?
I would say going outside and testing, and by outside it covers I think a huge variety of different. It could be in a field, it could be in a car park, it could be offshore on a boat, it could be up a mountain, whatever. But if you're now not in a lab and you're not in nice controlled conditions, the risks and the complexities and the time and the effort that it takes are an order of magnitude bigger, and it's really easy to forget about that. Like, I'm just going to shove it in my car and I'm going to drive to the quayside and then I'm going to lower it in the water and then we're going to test it. But it's just always, every time you actually go to site, everything takes so much longer than you think it will do. Sort of even when you've done these sorts of things quite a lot before, it's very easy to sort of envisage what you want to happen. But when you get to site, things go wrong. Not wrong as such, but you haven't got the two bits don't bolt together properly, or you drop a nut in the water and you didn't bring a spare with you, or you've got a whole load of lifting slings and lifting shackles, but the shackle doesn't quite fit, and you can't get the lifting strap through the shackle, and you need to go and buy another one that's a little bit thinner. And all these things just keep adding time because you're driving off to the hardware store to go and buy something else, and you've gone and lost another hour. And it's just the ruthless planning and organization is really, really important. And you hope people are like, yeah, we'll just figure it out on site. That'll be fine. It'll be great. But you can, and you do, everyone who listens to this is clever and can sort out problems and solve problems and firefight, but it's very expensive and time consuming if that's the mentality. I would say ruthless planning of being outside. If you're outside and you're in the wild, if you like, not with Toolstation around the corner, then the planning is really key.
Yeah. An analogy I like to quote is learning to walk before you can run, or swim in the case of offshore renewables, which we obviously work in. Before some of the larger scale offshore mobilizations and demonstrations we've been involved in, it's all about de-risking and trying and doing assembly trials and tests and everything you can on land dry before you go out to water. Again, removing that risk of anything going wrong when you actually go out. Speaking of sort of assembly trials, and you alluded to it there, Tim, things not fitting together. I think something that's maybe overlooked by a lot of startups is just that, is assembly and things fitting together. And you think of testing and you immediately think of load testing or performance testing and collecting data and things. But perhaps one of the more simpler tests you need to do is just ensure that your manufactured parts will fit together and that you can physically get your hand in where you need to, which these things can't be captured really by staring at it on a computer screen. You need to have something in your hands, and you need to have technicians and people around you who will be ultimately using this equipment or putting it together and assessing, I can get my hand in there and I can tighten that up. And so doing all of these things in the workshop before you mobilize to go offshore where or indeed into the field or up a mountain as Tim suggested. Before you reach that stage of mobilization where you really do need to just have that rigorous planning, and you're looking at things like weather windows and all these things, just de-risking and getting everything done, or as much done as you can in the workshop before doing that, before going into a mobilized state.
I think when I was thinking about some of these questions that you'd posed, I said there are three things that I thought were kind of critical here in terms of testing. You, as James alluded to there, test as much as you can before you either get to site or before you actually run your device. Make sure all your subsystems are working. Like test again. Make sure it's absolutely working before you're committing to going out on a boat or climbing up a hillside or whatever. Just make sure it absolutely works and really works before you go out. The second thing is data. You won't regret sticking another sensor in there to measure something that you didn't think you were going to need. Because when you get back to the office and you're looking at how it worked, the more data you have, the better. You won't regret putting another sensor in to measure pressure or temperature or the weather conditions or whatever. And the third thing I'd say is record what you did. You definitely will not regret having a nice proper document or documentation or spreadsheet of exactly what you tested, why you tested it, what happened on each test, what you changed in between the tests. I know it's really frustrating and you just want to get on and like, let's change this and let's see if this works. But a week after you finish the testing and you've actually sort of forgotten exactly what you did and what conversation you had with who and what they said, it's really important, really, really important.
It's giving me flashbacks of many DIY projects that have not been planned out very well. And I've had to do those emergency trips to B&Q to go, I did not buy this bit, didn't do that. And yes, lots of, there's probably bits of my house you don't want to look at that if you look under the hood, I'm sure something will collapse because I've just patched over it. So yes, I can imagine if it's a big piece of energy tech, you don't want that type of environment. One of the things you picked on there, which is really useful. So that's really helpful to know about the planning process and how you think about it. And then what is best practice in terms of tracking that data, the lessons learned? How do you know if a test has worked, hasn't? How do you, you mentioned spreadsheets. Is that something that's common? Is it, photos, videos? What, if you were saying
we always have on site, I always have a log, and every 10 minutes, there's always a laptop on site, and I'm always trying to just every 10 minutes, just quick scribble down of what we've just done for the last 10 minutes. Just a set of brief notes, and then in the evening I'll probably go through and write it up again. But just that little memory jogger of what happened and when and why is really important. Photos are great, but you can get back from a week of site and you've got 300 photos, 500 photos, and you can't remember why you took that photo of a bolt that was there, like photo number 126. So management of photos can be quite tricky, but yeah, take loads of evidence, get lots of evidence from photos and videos, definitely.
And just in terms of that validation verification, when that comes up, how critical is then that evidence trail? What are some red flags where if you don't do that quite right and you are being scrappy startup and you're bolting things on and screwing things, does that have an impact on, I guess, certification? Do you need to run tests again? What impact does all that evidence have?
It very much depends on what stage you're at. If you're in the very early stages of TRL levels, then don't get too distracted with certification. DNV aren't going to be interested in your plywood model test. That's for you to do and for you to know. And if you've done it properly, then brilliant. They'll only be interested when you've got something pretty much close to your commercial product. So don't get too distracted with the rules and regulations in the early stages of TRL, definitely. But just to touch back on one of your previous question, which was how do you know you've done it properly? it's really important to know why are you testing? Why are you there in the first place? What are the requirements of the test? What are the objectives? And if you get to the end of the week and you can't write down that you've met your objective for the test, then either stay out there or carry on testing, or decide to call it quits and go back to the office and lick your wounds, whatever. That's absolutely fine. That's all part of the learning process. But if you arrive on the Monday morning and you know exactly what it is you need to get out of the week, that you're there, that's a much better place to be.
And one of the things I can imagine coming up, maybe it doesn't, but we often see engineers being so passionate about trying to fix things and solve things. They're problem solvers by nature. So what happens when something needs tweaked? You're maybe doing the testing and your team don't agree. You've got lots of different courses of action. One wants to adjust something, one wants to, does that come up? And what's the best practice in terms of trying to get everybody aligned with a course of action to go, well, we need to move on to the next step. We can't, we've got enough from that. Because I can imagine it being quite complicated where you've got 10 different voices saying 10 different ways of doing it. How do you navigate that?
I think as Tim mentioned in the previous question, at sort of early stage TRL, it's almost, you don't need to sort of concern yourself too much about these sort of things. But certainly once you get to the larger demonstrations and trials, like you say, if something does require a change or a tweak, then there can be can be a bit of a sort of a friction. It can generate some friction. Let's say. I think this is where having documentation and processes in place is very important. So, like at Blackfish, for instance, we have our internal management of change processes. If something technical or indeed project comes up, if with part of life people move on, or people come and go, or maybe suppliers drop off the radar, and you have to make these changes, then having our internal process allows us to manage that and do it in a structured way that's that hopefully reduces any sort of potential sort of any potential friction and just improves clarity for everybody that's involved. And then also as a consultancy, obviously we deal with the clients processes that they have, or indeed we support them with it, because a lot of our clients are early stage startups and don't necessarily have these processes in place. But yeah, it can absolutely happen. You're right, Ed, and we've seen these things many a time. That you cover as many bases as you can, but inevitably, when you have 1,000 different fasteners and they're all different sizes and things, from time to time you will get the wrong size ordered, or things need to change. And as I sort of exemplified earlier, maybe you are in the workshop and you realize, you can't get your hand in there to tighten up that bolt, for instance, and so there needs to be a design change. We see it happen all the time, and so having processes in place to be able to deal with that is always useful. But then it also comes down as well to design, and as part of your initial design requirements, which again we have a lot of experience developing our own, but then also on behalf of clients, looking at things like how many different sizes of off-shelf components are we using? Can we reduce that to just one or two standard sizes that we're using? And that could be part of an individual design technology development, or it could be a company philosophy. Obviously at Blackfish we deal with lots of different projects, and so we have that philosophy of, well, let's just use where possible, let's just use fasteners or off-shelf items from a small list of set sizes that we're familiar with, and we can reduce that risk of parts going missing or wrong size parts and that kind of thing when it comes to ordering. But yeah, you're absolutely right. These things happen, and it's just about having mature head on your shoulders, and and the process is always help as well. Documentation.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, James. I'd also add that we're engineers, and yeah, I guess most of the people who are developing this are engineers or scientists or whatever. We're talking about developing technology. So yeah, we're all we're clever people. We can solve problems, etc. We can firefight on site, and that's fine. But part of testing, and usually there'll be a few people involved. It's rare that one person would do it all on their own. It's a very kind of it's quite an emotional experience. It's a human experience. It's you're working as a team, and I think the human factors and the team working and the collaboration and the dealing with arguments, dealing with difference of opinion, kind of acknowledging when someone's done a good job or saying when someone hasn't done a good job. Those are just as important in a way when you're out at site as the engineering and the process control and the change control and did we keep good records and all that kind of thing. The human element is really important. And one of those things, I guess, from an organizational point of view, is just understanding who's in charge, who gets to make the final decision. And if you've agreed that beforehand, then that really does help resolve a lot of these issues, because you know there's someone who's making decisions, and it's not just the person who shouts loudest. You understand how you're going to make those decisions as a team. And that's obviously the same in any walk of life. Whenever there's more than 2 or 3 people trying to achieve something, overcoming friction within a team can often be far more difficult than solving the problems in itself.
Yeah, that's a nice way of thinking about it as well. It's not just an engineering challenge, but it's a mission of the team as well, because not only are you going to get to the end and have the technology solved, but you as a team are going to be the ones to deliver it. But then kind of flipping that on two sides, maybe picking up then setbacks. I think you brought this up earlier, is that it's great when the trials work and it functions and it's great, but equally there's going to be times where it doesn't, or something can't be solved on site. So how do you navigate that in the team? How do you keep morale high, or kind of what's your advice to startups when they have done a trial and it hasn't worked out and they're back to the drawing board and they're sitting there on Monday going, where do we go? What would you say to them at that point?
It definitely helps to ask yourself the question before you go to site. What if we get to Friday afternoon and this hasn't worked? Just to mentally put yourself in that space for a few minutes and just think, what if this test is a total disaster? What am I going to do? And the decision might be, well, we're going to stay out for another week and we're going to fix the problem and we're going to do another week. You might be very aware that you just can't afford a boat for another 5 days. So if it gets to Friday morning and it's a disaster, I'm cutting my losses. We're coming home. We're going to lick our wounds and work out what went wrong and think about it back in the office and go back another day. But certainly putting yourself in that position before you're there to think, what if this is a disaster? What am I going to do? Is very helpful.
I think, there's lots of different ways trials can go wrong, right?
Exactly.
They can go wrong, technically or for whatever reason, poor weather window or something. Maybe you have to cancel, call it a day early. So there's lots of different ways something could go wrong, but to just sort of at a very high level sort of categorize, a trial could go wrong, inverted commas, if your technology, your design doesn't meet the requirements or doesn't meet the performance expectations that you hoped for, that maybe your whole technology development is kind of based on. It's pivotal that it demonstrates this performance and you've not achieved that. And so that is very common. A lot of the technology developments that we deal with, is sort of first of a kind, world's first type energy devices or processes. And so it's very plausible that no matter how much small scale and modeling you do, once you go up to that full scale and you've de-risked it as much as possible, of course. But sometimes fundamentally things just don't necessarily work at scale, which, needless to say, is disappointing, heartbreaking even. The other way, a test could go wrong, as I alluded to there, is maybe you have to call it early. The weather isn't ideal. Maybe something didn't show up. Maybe somebody didn't show up. There's that sort of the sort of logistic side of something going wrong. And in both of those cases, unfortunately, there is an element of back to the drawing board, back to the office, and evaluating, what went wrong, and what are the next steps? Can we afford to rerun this? What do we change? And so it sucks. There's an element of back to the drawing board, but I think it's important to remember that in both of these sort of high level cases, there are very, very valuable learnings and lessons that you can take forward. So to a certain extent, even an unsuccessful trial in inverted commas has some useful learning to it, whether that's performance wise, and this is absolutely a reason for taking as much data and video recordings and photos and things as Tim mentioned. That performance data and that technical data can feed into perhaps a design change and a redesign. So that is absolutely valuable, and maybe it's disappointing you've not reached your performance targets, but you've learned a heck of a lot about what your system can do and maybe where it needs to change. And then of course, from a logistics point of view, there are lessons to learn there as well. Maybe you need to work with a different subcontractor or something. There are lessons that you can learn, and so it's just important not to be disheartened, I suppose, when tests go awry. I've been involved in a few where performance sort of outcomes weren't as we hoped, and I know you've been involved in the same, Tim, various trials and things where you sort of come away and you think, I've had my heart set on seeing this perform and doing X, Y, and Z, and it ultimately didn't achieve it. So yeah, I would say, on a sort of a personal level, and I know that a lot of startups, it is very personal, and you put your it's your baby effectively. You're investing your time and your effort in it. I would say it's important not to get disheartened when tests and trials don't necessarily go the way you envisaged, because there's always something that you can learn, and like I say, take that into ultimately a redesign or replanning for doing it again or doing it in some other way.
Excellent. And it's a bit of a depressing topic, but it's a really interesting side, because the last theme I want to kind of touch upon is then investors, partners, and other things, because not only is doing the technical testing quite stressful and the team themselves are precious and excited about getting the results, but then when you add in the layers of maybe you're on a customer site or maybe you've got investors, and the worst example is the Theranos Elizabeth Holmes kind of aspect, where they had this blood monitoring device and they were lying to everyone and saying it was working, and that these tests weren't working and they were hiding. So maybe a starter question around, well, when you're getting these results, how transparent do you be? So if you do have trial partners, you do have investors, you do have your team, good or bad, what is best practice in terms of sharing those results? Should it be kept within the engineering team to kind of solve it and keep them in silos? Should this be quite transparent and open? What would you recommend to kind of energy tech startups?
Yeah. That's a very difficult question to answer as a generic principle. I suppose ultimately the generic principle is don't lie. I think that will only ever get you into more trouble down the line at some point. That being said, if you're talking to investors, then there's a certain narrative you need to spin, and you probably don't want to wash all your dirty laundry in public. Particularly if you can solve the problem and a week later you can be like, look at this, it's all brilliant. I solved the problem. You don't need to tell them everything, but I definitely wouldn't say lie.
It's a pretty clean line.
But it very much depends on your personal relationships with your collaborators and partners, and what you're trying to do and what stage you're at. You've got to. Yeah, I don't know. I can necessarily give any generic advice on that. You've got to manage that tricky maze depending on the circumstances.
I think maybe something generic to add, Tim, is debugging as much as you can beforehand. If there is scope, if you have budget, and if it's feasible to run the test as an internal team first and get some results and just verify that things run smoothly, the test apparatus and so on. then absolutely do that before you bring in
Yes.
before you bring in clients and potential stakeholders and things.
Mm.
But yeah, it's one of those that yeah, very much depends on your relationship, which is why it is important to develop these strong personal relationships as much as anything else with with your stakeholders, and if you can get them in and you know yeah, it's maybe sort of it's negative to think about something going wrong, but at the same time, it's a fantastic opportunity to show it off, and customers and clients and stakeholders, their eyes will light up if it goes smoothly, and if it does what you say it can do, and so yeah, you should be fearful of that. But yeah, it very much depends, I think, that one.
That's good. And I think keeping on that theme around, so we kind of spoke a lot about those early stage elements, the sort of testing, experimenting. We've maybe looked at some of those first getting the prototype out into the real world, but then as you start to get to those mature ones that you showed there, that's maybe where, particularly in the energy sector, there is these big collaborations. You can't test it on a site. You don't own a wind turbine. You don't own an oil and gas platform. So then you've got these collaborations. So I guess, again, thinking about doing demos and trials with those partners, how should startups go about trying to get those partners for trials and demos? And again, also maybe navigating, I guess, competitiveness and intellectual property. They may have an ideal customer who maybe could buy their technology out. Is that the type of partner they should target earlier? Again, it'll be very different for each startup. But again, how would you advise startups to think, well, this is how you might think about going about industrial partnerships, trials, collaborations, as they're getting to that later testing?
I think, I alluded a few minutes ago to kind of there's the engineering processes, and then there's the human processes of testing. I think the choosing your partners and collaborators and how you manage that landscape is a challenge in itself. It's quite difficult to define exactly how you need to do it, but it is a challenge to find the right people. Definitely I guess from all the different projects that I've done over the years, working with people that you trust is the most important bit. Having relationships where you don't really trust what they're telling you is really bad. Actually, it inevitably goes wrong at some point down the line. So you've got to trust the people you work with, and you've got to be able to tell them when something hasn't worked, or when they haven't performed, or it's not going to plan. What are we going to do about it? You've got to be able to work with these people. So it's worth having those really strong personal relationships with your collaborators, rather than just choosing the cheapest one.
I think my to add to that, Tim, I think my advice at the earliest stage would just be to just cast your net wide, just get involved in events and conferences, and to go out and meet people. And I think the temptation as as an early stage startup, obviously you believe in your idea and you believe it's going to be a success. The temptation is, I want to speak to the head of whatever project developer, or I want to attract money and so on, and which is fine. You need to have these. You need to ultimately have these relationships and form these connections. But just speak to anybody and everybody, because you just don't know where it could lead. You could be at a conference and you could meet to somebody who seems quite unassuming, and they might say, I've got an acquaintance who runs a fish farm or something. They might be interested in installing your demonstrator, and you just don't know. And speaking from a consultant's point of view, we're always happy to speak to everybody, because we understand that it's not necessarily about going out and targeting the people that we want to speak to, which is important as well, of course. But you just do not know where certain conversations will lead. And again, from a consultant's point of view, we can testify from our involvement with the NZTC and the TechX over the last few years, that we've been getting involved in projects and things that we never thought we would get into in industries, and we've been chatting with people in carbon capture and developing batteries and all various projects that weren't necessarily our sort of bread and butter, 7-8 years ago. And so I think that's as good a testimony as any to just go out and speak to everybody, cast your net wide, and see who you meet, and might meet the love of your life. You never know. Just go out and form these connections. LinkedIn is obviously very, very useful as well.
Excellent. We've gone from field trials and demos to dating advice.
How long
your
have you got?
future
How long
trial
have you got,
partner. Yeah, no, I love it. It's good. And I guess maybe another broad question that might be a bit of a challenge, but I think exactly as you said, a lot of the startups, we think they want to work, maybe it's the big energy majors or these big organizations. Is there any red flags or issues that come up when you start putting that demonstration unit on another client's site? You are integrating into their systems. What kind of, in the planning process of that trial, is there a couple of things you would say, well, bear in mind these things that your previous testing will not have come up with yet, or you maybe haven't thought about it? Is there things that might come up in terms of plugging into another client's site that is worth startups thinking around maybe TRL 7, 8, 9 testing?
Probably loads of things without knowing exactly what it is you're testing. I would say most of the problems that arise from either when you're putting different systems together or even different subsystems together, or if you're putting a system in with somebody else's, most of the problems that you will come across arise from interfaces. And if you don't know how you're interfacing with something else, that's definitely where issues arise. Control systems with motors, the body of the motor and the forces with the steelwork, the communication systems, the sensors, the data logging. There's usually so many interfaces where things don't go quite to plan, and having a really good understanding of how you're going to interface, who's managing what data, who's managing. So you've got two things that bolt together. Who provides the bolts? So often that's forgotten about. You just think, oh yeah, we'll bolt this onto that, and no one turns up with the bolts or no one's even defined the bolts that connect the two together. So a fairly simple example, but interfaces is so often where it goes wrong.
Yeah, and we always advocate, including that as part of a thorough design requirements assessment at the start, is just understanding your interfaces, and then also interfaces from a logistics point of view and a human point of view. Who are we going to be working with on the trials? Who is the focal point or the point of contact? Just understanding and capturing all these things as early as possible.
So maybe unpack that design requirements. Is there best practice to have a real detailed trial document or planner, or kind of what does that look like in terms of what gets produced before a client trial happens?
Well, it depends on the level you're doing, but if you're at TRL 7 or 8 and you have effectively your full scale technology, or maybe half scale or something of a complex subsystem, it's you're spending serious money doing a serious project. So to get the documentation right, I mean, it kind of sounds easy, but it's really it's easy to get too excited and carried away with, oh, we're going to test this, let's just go. But you're maybe talking about attracting millions of pounds of investment. Having a requirement spreadsheet is not rocket science, and it might take you a day's effort, but that day's effort to know that you haven't gone and made a silly mistake, and that's going to cost you another week of testing or something is it's really important. The kind of the mentality of agile, if you like, when you're in your early TRL stages, yes, be agile, go and learn fast and break stuff, and that's fine. Change your mind, pivot, move around, change direction. That's great. That's brilliant. As soon as you're in these later TRLs, that what was agile, it now just comes across as chaotic and disorganized when you've got multidisciplinary teams, supply chains, collaboration partners, certification organizations. They want to see some nice reference reports that are revision controlled and release drawings that have the right initials on. as-built reports, that kind of thing. So it's a really important aspect of what you're trying to do in these later stages of testing. Definitely don't underestimate that.
An observation I've had, and I'm sure you would probably agree with this, Tim, is that design requirements, particularly early stage, tend to be a bit of a humbler in terms of we see a lot of startups and inventors, and they're very excited, and we can do this, and the system will do that, but when you actually break it down and we actually write it out, and you start to say what the system needs to do in order to meet the its intended function, we often see that people are very ambitious at the early stage, and the design requirements is a great way of reining in and saying, well, these are the requirements that we must meet or are fundamental to what makes our design. But certain other aspects, maybe we don't develop at this stage. Maybe we use off-shelf components, for example. Circling back to one of my earlier points. But yeah, certainly design requirements as a tool itself, very, very, very useful. And as Tim says, it's important to have this documentation at the later stages of TRL development. At the early stages, it's also just really good in terms of identifying exactly what it is you want to be developing. And as I say, I think certainly from our experience, we'd say that it's a bit of a humbler in terms of naturally inventors and startups tend to come in and think, and perhaps rightly so, that their device or their invention is what did they say, the greatest thing since sliced bread, that old phrase. But yeah, certainly when you write it out, it really helps in terms of identifying what it is it needs to achieve.
That sort of reminds me of another point slightly related to this, and I don't think you've asked the question directly, but I'll say it anyway. And that is, when you're doing your test, you're trying to test your minimum viable product to get to a commercial product. It's really, really easy to get distracted with innovation and new ideas, and if we change this, we could make it better, and let's improve this, let's swap this piece out. Try, if you can, decide on your minimum viable product. That is what you're trying to do. There are your requirements. Go be laser focused. That is what I'm doing. In parallel, capture all the good ideas that you're having. Have somebody in your team develop those good ideas, and when they're ready to be brought into your MVP, then bring them in as a proven idea, improvement, whatever. Don't keep changing your MVP all the way along, because you'll just never get it finished. It'll just end up with delays and delays and delays, because there's always a new idea. There's always something. Next month there'll be another idea that you're going to go like, oh wow, that's brilliant, let's use it. So yeah, manage your innovation and R&D separately to creating your MVP.
That's really useful. And I can imagine, just from the startups that we've worked with, there is that maturity, as you've spoken about. There almost is this transition from the experimenter phase to the more mature company, where actually you do need this process. If you're raising at that level, you really do need to think about the serious. It reminds me, on the bread analogy, of the exercise they often do with young children, where they say, give us explanations on how to make a cup of tea or a sandwich. And when children say, get the bread out of the cupboard, they get the bread with the packaging still on it, and then they say, spread the jam on the bread. Well, then the teacher spread the jam on the packaging, because you didn't give the clear instructions to say, take one slice out, put it on. Is there a plate? No, we didn't even get the knife out. So actually having that minute detail of going, don't assume everybody knows exactly the steps you want to take at that mature, but probably at all stages, is very helpful. So you've taken us through a really nice journey there in terms of that experimental phase, and then thinking about how you plan it, breaking down all the different components and subsystems, to the human aspects in terms of managing expectations and failure and challenges, through to some of those working with partners and the kind of requirements to keep those clear processes, systems, documents as well. So I think that probably brings us near the end of our time there. So thank you so much to Tim and James and the wider Blackfish Engineering team, who have always been very supportive of the TechX program and have worked with a number of our startups over the years. So thank you to those who've tuned in to EnergyTech Essentials. Today, this is part of a series that we're doing at the Net Zero Technology Centre, really to unpick some of the steps it takes to build some of the most exciting energy technologies on the planet, and some of the exciting partners that we work with who can help you take a step along the way. There's various other series of episodes that we will be publishing as well, so keep an eye out for all of those. And of course, keep an eye out for our TechX Accelerator program, where we support startups with funding, training, and partners like that you've heard from today. So thank you for everyone who has watched along, and thank you to James, Tim, and the Blackfish team for joining today's session, and we'll see everyone again sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you.